Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar, Things to Consider Before You Invest in Law Firm Marketing. We are very excited to have you. This is me, I'm Diana Steepleton, VP of Partner Engagement here at Ruby Receptionist. As the slide says, we currently answer for about 3,500 law firms in the US and Canada. We answer for about 8,500 businesses overall. So we don't just handle law firms, but it is definitely the biggest segment of our business. I have been with Ruby almost 10 years. We've been answering phones for about 15 years. And our claim to fame is our extremely friendly and professional receptionists and the wonderful connections that they develop with both the callers, potential clients, existing clients, and with our customers, potentially you. So now I'm going to let Jim introduce himself.
Great. Thanks, Diana. My name is Jim Christie. I'm the CEO at Postali. Postali is a marketing agency specifically for attorneys. We're based out of Columbus, Ohio. We've been around for just under 10 years, and we do a wide range of marketing services, everything from direct mail to website design to SEO, photo, video production, kind of the whole gamut of things. And as such, we've worked with a lot of law firms and have understood a lot of the pitfalls of things that are peripheral to marketing that make the marketing campaigns less effective as they could be. That's kind of the reason for our conversation today.
Wonderful. And I think I failed to mention that we are in Portland, Oregon, so we are not in the same city. We're just on the same call together. So let's do a little logistics here. During today's presentation, I would love you to ask questions. We'd both love you to ask questions. So in the GoToWebinar little portal thing, you'll see an opportunity, a box where you can type in your questions. Please feel free to ask your questions as we're speaking. You don't need to wait till the end. If it works well, we'll handle the questions as they come. We may handle them at the end instead. And if for some reason we don't get to your question, we will absolutely email you a response later. Also later, we will be sending you a recording of this webinar. So that will be coming as well.
Perfect.
I think it's you, Jim.
So what we're going to cover today is essentially how to lay a strong foundation before you invest in marketing. One of the things that we get asked a lot, especially by either young lawyers who are just starting their practice or by attorneys who just haven't needed to market to bring in business, but eventually have grown to have that need, they'll say, what do I need to do for my marketing? And one of my first questions is, well, let's talk a little bit about your operations to make sure that the money that you're spending isn't just going out the window. Great marketing can be foiled by bad operations. That's something we've learned over time. So I want to talk about that. We're also going to talk a little bit about how to make a great first impression. The folks at Ruby are exceptional at this, so I think that Diana will have a lot of good insight into that. Likewise, for the nuts and bolts of a powerful intake process, we've seen a lot of success and failures in this that I'm going to comment on. And then lastly, it's just the risk of not having a solid plan, which essentially results in a loss of money or a very inefficient spend. So that's what we'll cover today. And I'll jump right into the actual practice operations. So even though this might sound a little bit strange coming from someone who runs a marketing company, I don't think that marketing is the first thing that you should be focusing on when you're starting out your law firm. I think that the practice operations is step one. There are so many logistical items that, one, if you don't account for them early on, you might never. So meaning, if you don't set up a good intake process, you might be 2 or 3 years in and realize that you've never done that, and now you're too busy to do it, and you don't really know the opportunity cost of doing that. And really, at the end of the day, in marketing, you're paying for opportunities. You need to maximize those opportunities. And your operations, if they're shored up well, it'll allow you to be successful in ways that you wouldn't be if you were just kind of flying by the seat of your pants, so to speak. So moving into
super basic. I was going to say on a super basic level, if I can add in here, even very simple infrastructure things like your phone number, that ideally you didn't start your firm using your cell phone number, and now the world has that. But having a dedicated phone number, even if it's a Google Voice number that you can do something with, do something interesting with later, but having a phone number and having a good URL and email address, and even a physical address, whether that's a virtual office or whatever that happens to be. But those types of infrastructure things are also things that super important to think of up front. and that it might be fine for a while if you don't, but over time it is likely to come back and bite you, which I say only because I've heard hundreds, literally, of stories of those types of things biting people later.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things we'll talk about today, this is kind of the beginner level course on this, but they might seem so simple, but it's always surprising to me, and I think, Diana, that's what you're saying, that the number of people that don't plan for some of these really basic elements, it's just kind of staggering, which is why we're jumping into this. So you mentioned office locations and space. I think that's something that realizing we have a typo already in the first one, but what does your office space look like? And this is really the first question is, do you even need an office? I think in today's day and age, you might not even have to have a physical office, but you have to think about what that means to your practice. So and what it means for your marketing. So I'll speak to this more from a marketing perspective first, and I think Diana will probably have some comments on what it means from a client intake perspective. So from a marketing perspective, you really need to have a physical office if you're going to do any type of advertising online, especially with the relevance of Google local search, how people are finding you. It's not impossible to be found without a physical location, but so much of what a search engine does is look at proximity of a searcher and try to match it with somebody who's close by. If you don't have an actual office location, even if it is just a virtual office, which some marketing companies will tell you might not be the best strategy, it's still better than having nothing at all. Whereas if you're not planning to do online marketing, you're planning to do something that's more geared towards people not having to come to your office, they can just call you. It might be a good idea to save that overhead money and not have an office. You can maybe work out at your home, meet people in coffee shops. So just thinking about what that looks like, really in the context of who is your user, like who is your end consumer, and will they be put off if they have to go to a Starbucks to meet you versus going to a downtown office or something like that. And I think, Diana, you want to talk a little bit about the appearance of the office itself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we are kind of hyper focused on here at Ruby is this idea of touch points, that there are so many different touch points. Every interaction you have with your clients, potential clients, or even interactions that they have on their way to your office, are there potholes in your parking lot type of thing, can impact the way they feel about you. And so there's lots of good articles out there about how to kind of make sure that you're looking at all those touch points, but it can be anything from, obvious things like how you answer the phone and what your website looks like, and what your emails look like, what your bills look like, those kind of things that obviously have a strong impact on your clients or potential clients when they interact with them. But also even just less obvious things like, are there old magazines on the table in the waiting room? You might have a shared waiting room with other people. You might be in like a WeWork space or something where you don't have your own office. You're not completely in control of all those touch points. But anything that you can do, maybe you're the only one in the WeWork who notices that there's old magazines in the waiting room, or that the plant in the corner is dying. Those types of things have a greater impact on people than you may realize. Or even, if you're in a shared office space and there's a restroom down the hall, and it's not its best. I'm sure we've all had that experience where you go to a really nice restaurant and you're having a lovely time, and then you go to the restroom and you're like, wow, no one's paying attention to this room, and it does make an impression. So all of those little tiny things, it's kind of the opposite of like death by paper cuts, that all those little things add up and either help people form a great impression of you or a bad one. So some of those are super easy to deal with and, take very, very little work, but you just got to kind of think through it. We've done exercises here where we literally sit down and make a list of 100 touch points. And at the beginning, you're like, oh, that's easy, and after about 30, you start going, oh yeah, okay, well, there's that. That's true. The sign outside, that's not really the clearest thing, anything. So it's an interesting exercise to go through. Anyway, we'll let you get back to it.
Yeah. No, and that's a great point. Something that we struggle with in our office, and we don't have a lot of people coming in here, so it's probably okay, but we always have delivery sitting in the front, and no one in our office notices because they see it every day. But the very first thing that anybody says who hasn't come into the office is like, do you need to do something for this, or should I bring this somewhere? So I think just being mindful of those things that can be very, very obvious to somebody new, but very just oh, that's been there forever. That box has been there for 2 months and it'll never move. Those things
Right.
definitely matter. So moving on to kind of the more virtual side of things, oftentimes clients are calling you first before they ever plan to sit down with you and talk, if they ever plan to sit down with you and talk. And I think that's something that when we talk with a lot of our clients in certain practice areas specifically, criminal defense is a great example, even family law to a lesser extent, we're finding that a lot of our clients are having success just signing clients over the phone and not and really handling the intake through the phone versus in person, which I think to some firms feels a little bit disconnected or disengaged. But I think the way that people want to get things done, sometimes they just want to call an attorney if they have a good feel for them. They'll hire them on the spot. So I think if your practice lends itself to delivering quick information and your fees are such that you can say, look, this would be $1,000. It's pretty straightforward. I can just take payment and then we can send you paperwork later. Might be a great solution to a customer experience concern of, do I have to travel somewhere? So think about, can you really handle a lot of your work over the phone, or do you need people to come in to the office? That's definitely an element of client service that gets overlooked, especially when you have a lot of time. When you have a lot of time, from what we've experienced, young lawyers or people starting the office, they'll invite everyone in to come and sit down for consultations, not realizing that that's going to become inefficient down the line unless you have a large support staff or continually hire lawyers. So plan for the growth that you want, not necessarily the number of clients you have today from this perspective. The next step is just, how do you charge for services? This is something that it seems that a lot of folks that we talk to who are early in their practice are kind of guessing a lot. They don't do a lot of research to say what's the market rate for this. They'll just talk to a couple friends and kind of move on. But from a client's perspective, this is something that if you're waffling on price, or if your price is very different in structure from your competition, that's going to seem a little bit strange. So just think about how you're charging before you think about what you're going to do to bring in clients. Not to mention, if you know how to charge and you have client acquisition goals in mind, you kind of have a better understanding of what you should invest in. So for example, if you know your average case is going to be $2,500 and you want to get 10 of those, so your revenue might be $25,000 for the month, that gives you a better understanding of what you should be spending to get that, versus saying, well, I'm not sure what my retainer is going to be. I don't know how many cases I want. Then really, for someone in my position, I have no idea what I should suggest to you from a return on investment perspective. So let's us both go into that conversation with a lot more clarity. Okay, so the next step is the actual intake process itself. This is something I encourage everybody to do as an exercise, even if you've been practicing for 30 years or a month. Analyze your intake process periodically. If you don't have one, build one. There are a handful of questions that we have found will be large, all-encompassing, and you can always drill down. So I'll just read through a few of those right now. One is just, before you even think about what someone is saying on the phone, is just who actually answers the phone. One of the slides that we'll share later is that early on, it makes a ton of sense for the lawyer to answer the phone, especially if you're friendly, you have the time to do it, you're the most knowledgeable person in that office. So that's what a client wants. They want immediate answers. But over time, that might not always be the case. You may not have time to give people the care and attention. You also may not have the best phone demeanor. So being self-aware enough to say, this isn't for me. I need to find somebody who can do this. So who answers the phone is one. How do they answer the phone? So what is the greeting? Diana and I were actually joking about this as we were putting this together, that so many people or so many firms will answer the phone just with a boilerplate law office. Like, one, I don't know who I just called. It's not making me feel friendly. It's making me feel like a burden. So just, what's the tone? What are the things you want to introduce? Those are things that are very important. So how's the actual phone answered? What information is gathered during the call? And this comes down to, again, like, are you trying to get people into the office, or are you trying to do a little bit of an intake over the phone? So have a list of 5 or 6 key items you want to gather on the call, and who's ever doing that initial answer, make sure you get that. And this should be basic information. Like if you think that you might get disconnected, if you think the call might be short, get name, phone number, a good time to call back, things like that. It's always great to get that up front. The fourth thing to ask is, what is the objective of the initial call? If you're just angling for an in-person appointment, that's great. The structure of that call looks very different than if you're trying to really qualify somebody to be a client. So just think about what the objective is at the end of that call. How do you discuss your fees? Do you discuss consultation fees up front? Do you have free consultations? Those are things that should be coming out in that primary telephone conversation. Also think about what the firm should... Sorry, if anybody heard that, just had something fall in my office.
You're right.
Think about the firm. Yeah, everything's good. It's just my trash can fell over. It's kind of strange. But what's the firm's unique value proposition? This is something that, especially as you hire more staff, you want to be able to provide some compelling information about why the firm should be hired, and knowing that in a concise statement is always helpful. Even if you're not doing a lot of selling per se over the phone, just knowing what makes the firm different so that can be interjected at the right time is a good thing to have on hand and part of this intake kind of strategy document. And then the last thing is, where does the information go after the call? It's really easy to just say, okay, I'm only getting a couple calls a week. I'm just going to put things in a spreadsheet, or I'm going to use Gmail or Outlook for all of this. But really try to plan for the future. What happens when you get a few calls an hour? Where does that information go? A spreadsheet probably isn't the most efficient. Like, is there a tool? Is there practice management? And just try to align that with the growth expectations of the firm. Okay, so moving on from there, this is something that I'll share a personal example of this, is that I used to handle all of the intake here. And at one point I realized I had gotten off the phone and I realized that I sounded very frustrated to the person who called, and they were just looking for information. And I've experienced this in talking with some of our clients, where if you're not in a mindset to answer the phone,
don't answer it.
Probably should.
Sorry.
Don't answer the phone. Yeah, absolutely. Just don't. If in the day you only have maybe an hour of free time, and the rest of the time you're just nose down working, or you're doing something else, you're probably not in a good mindset to really be listening and engaging. So don't put that burden on yourself, because it is a burden, and your potential clients will understand, and they'll feel that. They'll feel that maybe they're not the most important thing. So think that through. We made this mistake for probably 6 months, where I was just saying, I don't feel like I'm being as receptive to our potential clients as I used to. And that's when we engaged Ruby. This has been 4 years ago now, where they answer our calls now, because I was kind of a jerk at a certain point in time. And it was just, I could feel like a new client would call, and I'd like scowl a bit, like, oh, not right now, I'll call them back later. Like, that's not the mindset you want. Like, doesn't mean you don't care about them. It just means that that's not a great business operation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me take it from here for a moment. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Nice segue. So a couple things. First, I want to talk about this idea of the options you have for answering your phones. You can, as Jim said, answer your phone yourself. And there are certainly some pros to that. There are definitely some cons to that. When you're small and just starting out, whenever you're available, I don't think it's a bad thing to answer your own phone, particularly if you can get yourself in that correct mindset before you answer it. So this idea that you're knee deep in something, you're working on something, and the phone rings, and you have that kind of, now I've been interrupted, and then you answer with law office or hello or something else kind of gruff. But that if you can take, one extra ring, 5 more seconds before you answer the phone, and take a deep breath and think, this could be my next, my best new client. This could be my best new friend. Who knows? This could be, any number of great opportunities. And am I going to be as receptive as I can, or am I going to sound like, gosh, they just really interrupted me out of something important? So if you're going to answer your phone yourself, and I'll go through a few more details of things you can do when you answer your phone yourself. You just want to make sure that if you're doing that yourself, that you're in the right mindset every time the phone rings, every time you might have to answer it. And that does take some work. It's not hard. It's just you have to take those 5 seconds to do it. To really get yourself in the right mindset. Unless you happen to be one of those people who, when the phone rings, you're like, sweet, an opportunity, and you can answer it right away. So you can answer the phones yourself. If you have staff, obviously you can have staff answer your phones. You might have a paralegal or an assistant or something. If that person can manage the phones, answer them well, also without that same problem of sounding like they're being interrupted, then that's great. Often that works wonderfully for people. Often we hear from paralegals or the people who are supposed to be handling the phones while they're doing all of their other projects that it's challenging. It's hard to get their other stuff done, which definitely has to get done. But it's an option, of course. If you have the funds to hire a full-time receptionist, that is also obviously a good option. Full-time receptionists can bring with it other wonderful qualities like answering the phone and, answering the door, something physical in the office. So welcoming people who come into your office, or any number of other projects that a full-time receptionist could handle for you. And as long as the phone comes first for them, or there's some backup for if they have stepped away from the desk, great. And then the last option, I would be remiss if I did not mention, because it's what we do here at Ruby, is a live virtual receptionist service. So some people use a service like ours to make sure that every single caller gets a wonderful initial impression of the firm. So they simply take their published number, they forward it to us. We are their receptionist. We sound like an in-house receptionist. It's not like an answering service where they would answer and say answering service and sound like they're just going to take your message and not really care about it. But a service like ours really sounds like an in-house receptionist. So some people use us in that way. Some people use us as a backup. So they may want to answer their phones when they can, but know that if they're super busy with something or they're not there, that after a couple of rings of ringing in their office, then it would ring to us and we would be their backup. The thing that is most key, in my opinion, is just not to let your calls go to voicemail, because there are so many attorneys in the world, and if someone's trying to find one, they're not, the stats are kind of staggering. It's like 74% or something say that if they got voicemail, they'll just hang up. 72, 74, it's somewhere in that range. That they would just hang up and call another attorney, because there's a lot of them. So please just don't let your calls go to voicemail. And then, to Jim's point, you may spend a lot of time or money or energy to get your phone to ring. You work on your marketing, you're trying to get your phone to ring. When the phone rings, it's important to answer it, right? And lastly, I'll say that phone calls are kind of on the rise. There's been a lot of stats out there showing that because more people are now doing their pre-purchasing research on their mobile phone instead of doing it from their computer, that even if your website is perfectly designed to show up well on their tiny screen, the reality is people tire much more quickly of navigating on a tiny screen. And because that click to call button is just so handy, they'll hit that click to call button and call more frequently. So, we find about 70% of the traffic that comes to our website is coming from mobile phones. We also find that over the last couple of years, all the call volume for each of our individual clients is increasing. And I don't think they're all necessarily growing at that rate. I think it's really that phone calls are on the rise. Let me go to the next slide. There we go. So that is not the next slide that I wanted to go to. No, I can still talk on this one. So providing value and engaging the caller, I think I'll just go to this one here. So this is Ruby. This idea of making a great first impression is, as Jim said at the beginning, the stuff that we're telling you is not necessarily rocket science, but it's stuff that if you take a few minutes and put some thought to it and some energy to it, it can really be impactful for your firm. So what is involved in making a great first impression? So over the phone, at least. We're imagining this scenario of a potential new client. They've never called your firm before. They call. What do they get initially, right? Ideally, they'll get that the phone is answered quickly. So a couple rings, someone picks it up. If it gets to 6 rings, people are pretty sure nobody's home, and they'll move on. Then you want a friendly greeting. So again, this idea of law office or hello or some kind of greeting is not necessarily what we would recommend. And partially because people want to know, they're nervous already. They're potentially stressed. Most people when they're calling an attorney are not calling to say they have, inherited millions and they're trying to figure out what to do with it. But, they've got some issue that they're probably a bit stressed about. And so anything that you can do that kind of increases their comfort. So even just the idea of telling them where they've called, that they know they've reached the right firm, is very helpful. So we have this, what we call a little recipe for a great greeting, and that's simply that, there's some sort of friendliness to it. So, hello, thanks for calling, good morning, any of those kinds of things, just something cheery, followed by, this is what the firm is. So, the name of your firm, potentially your name as well, and then an offer of help. So, you put that all together. Good morning. Thanks for calling ABC Law Firm. This is Diana. How may I help you? And people go, oh gosh, great. Okay, now I've got a friendly person on the phone. I'm gonna engage. And then little things like language choice. We work a lot on that here at Ruby, and it's something that anyone can do. It is not rocket science. But this idea of how differently you come across when you choose your words carefully. So if someone asks you if you can do something, if someone says, gosh, could I leave Jim a message? And you say, sure, is very different than, I'd be delighted to take a message. It just kind of warms your heart and perks you up and go, oh, great, this sounds wonderful. So also this idea of being helpful and not giving someone a dead end. It's one of my pet peeves in life when I call a business and I ask a question and the person says, I don't know. And then there's just dead silence. And and I have to say, gosh, do you think anyone else might? Is there someone we could ask, So our receptionists, for example, are trained not to tell people they don't know. Often they don't know the answer. No one knows everything. But if someone asks them a question they don't know the answer to, they say, let me find out for you. Or let me see if the attorney's available and she might know, this type of thing. But just something other than a harsh dead end is very comforting. Let's put it that way.
And Diane, I have one thing to expand on, if I can jump in for a sec.
Sure.
Something that a lot of our clients have had success with related to this is learning from their mistakes. So I don't think anyone can expect to get this right the first time, every time,
right.
Especially if you haven't done a lot of intake. So I would really encourage everyone, if it's possible and you feel comfortable with it, like record intake calls, and listen back to them. I can't tell you how many times we've noticed that a client's conversion rate, so like the call to retain client percentage, goes up dramatically when they start understanding what specific language choices or what specific ways of describing the services or the firm either turn people into clients or turn people away. And you can really, it's hard to get it in the moment, but if you're, especially an outsider, going back and listening, and you can hear someone's tone change. So like, let's say, for example, a paralegal says something that really doesn't jive well with what the potential client's wanting to hear, and you can just hear them kind of like slink back in a little bit and go, ooh, now I'm less comfortable or I'm less confident. Don't make those same mistakes. Like, learn from it, record the calls, listen to it, and do that while you're, growing your practice. Don't, it should be something you do ongoing, but it's much harder to do when you're getting hundreds of calls a month versus a dozen or so. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, it makes me think of Groundhog's Day, where, he'd go out on a date with a girl and he would say something and it didn't go over well, and then the next day he got a chance to do it again, and just keep trying until you get it right. But this idea of listening to yourself and as Jim said, listening to the reaction of the other person, that you hear their tone change and you say, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that, then thinking of who's calling you, again, if it's a potential new client calling, you want to see this intake process as an opportunity to engage them. So, of course, there are benefits of pieces of information that are gathered during the intake. My kind of take on the whole intake process is that more than anything, it really is an opportunity to engage that caller. So to let the caller feel heard, to share their story a bit, to feel like you care. It really goes a long way in terms of providing comfort. And goes a super long way in terms of having them feel like they've developed a relationship with your firm. We hear that a lot, that our customers tell us that their clients say, hey, I went with your firm because that receptionist or the person who did the intake, was super friendly and helpful, and just made me feel cared for and kind of, engaged, if you will. And it just makes them that much less likely to hang up and call the next one on their list. One of the things I think I didn't mention when I said, whatever you do, don't let your calls go to voicemail. If someone calls and gets your voicemail, they don't know if you're gone for an hour or you're gone for a week. And so it's just not something that people are likely to leave a message and say, hey, if you happen to just be gone for 10 minutes, call me right back. They're just probably gonna move on. So let's see. So I think the only thing I really wanted to say on this, I think, Jim, you've got some things to say on this as well, but we do a lot of intake for our clients, and it's really, it can vary wildly. We have customers for whom we ask 5 questions of intake. We have customers for whom we ask 35 questions of intake, and everywhere in between. And what's important, in my opinion, when developing intake, and I'm sure Jim has an opinion on this as well, but it's this balancing act of, you want to ask to figure out what questions will help them feel like they engaged with you and give you the information you need to get things rolling a little bit. And it depends on, if you're doing the intake yourself, obviously you can ask all the questions you need to get the ball rolling. If you have paying someone to collect intake for you, then maybe you just want enough to just get that process started.
Yeah, and I think to chime in on that, I think there's 2 perspectives to look at it. One is, what do you need to ask the client so that they feel heard? And 2, what's the information that you need, like especially the minimum viable information that you need to figure out if this is somebody you want to work with. So you don't, especially as firms get busier and busier, figuring out what's a qualified person versus somebody who's literally just calling for advice or wasting time or doesn't really have a case. There are all these factors that we don't want the attorneys to waste time. So thinking about what information to collect should be twofold. One, let's make sure that the client feels, or the potential client feels great about the experience. But 2, let's get the information the firm needs to figure out what should our next step be. Is this somebody that we really want to sign up as a client? Maybe they didn't sign up, so we need to say if they meet these criteria, we should be calling them back periodically until they've decided to either hire a different lawyer or they're not going to hire somebody. So just having a cadence for that. One of the most simple things that we've noticed that has been effective is just getting basic contact information early in the call. This, again, sounds really fundamental, but oftentimes if you just focus on making sure somebody feels really great, you might not want to ask, like, hey, what's the best number to call you back? Like, what's the best time to reach you? Things like that, because a lot of calls will get disconnected, or someone will need to run, or they'll lose track of time, or you'll feel rushed. So get kind of a short list of things like phone number, name, preferred contact method. Get that up front, even just by saying, hey, I really want to hear about your case, but here are a few bits of information that I really need in case we get disconnected so that I can make sure I call you right back. So it's a way of capturing what you need without making them feel like you're just, checking boxes. And kind of my last step, and this is I've talked a little bit about what's on the next slide, but is keeping a record and standardizing this process is really key to success from our experience. Firms that are able to scale well, if scaling and growth is your goal, if something seems so fundamental and it's like, oh, of course we're going to do it this way forever, we don't need to write it down. As new attorneys come into the business, as new support staff comes into the business, or as you start outsourcing some of your work to firms like Ruby or of counsel attorneys, just having a standardized process, especially for your intake and how you interact with clients, is crucial. And the clients that have the best return on their investment are the ones that think about this early on, and they're diligent about making sure that everybody in their flow understands the right way to handle client intake, the right way to handle client care. So if it seems too simple to write it down would be my recommendation.
I would agree completely.
And I think that's all we have.
Yeah.
We're a little ahead of time, which is great.
We'll give everyone the gift of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
If you have any questions. I don't see any questions now. But if anyone does have any questions, we will be emailing this recording out. So if you think of any questions later, we'd love to hear from you. Jim's email is jchristie@postali.com, and mine is diana@callruby.com. You'll see them there on your screen. We would love to be of further assistance if we can.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
We'll talk to you next time.